Hook, the richest cowboy in the mountains, brought lumber to a struggling widow's door. But the reason he asked to rebuild her house was something nobody saw coming. The storm howled through Silver Creek Valley as Abby Monroe gripped a hammer with frozen hands, trying to hold her broken roof together. A heavy knock shook the wooden door. When she opened it, the giant rancher, William Hawthorne, stood in the snow with fresh-cut lumber on his shoulder and one unexpected request on his lips. Why would a man with everything risk everything for her? Stay with us to discover the truth behind this frontier love story. The winter of 1885 came early to Silver Creek Valley. By the middle of December, the road leading through the valley had disappeared beneath layers of snow and hard ice. The cottonwood trees along the creek stood bare and silent, their branches covered in frost. The mountains beyond the valley looked like they had been carved from stone, white and endless beneath a gray sky. For Abigail Monroe, winter was not something to admire from a warm window. Winter was something to survive. Abby stood on that roof of her small boarding house with one boot pressed against a wooden beam, one hand gripping a hammer, and the other holding a piece of tin she had been trying to fit over a leak since sunrise. The wind did not care about her plans. It pushed against the old building with enough force to make the walls creak. Every few minutes, Abby had to stop and steady herself while snow blew across the roof like handfuls of sand. "Ma'am, you better come down before that roof decides it's had enough of you." The voice came from below. Abby looked over the edge and saw Martha Collins standing beside the porch with a basket of supplies tucked under one arm. Martha owned the general store 2 streets down and had been Abby's friend since the day Abby first arrived in Silver Creek Valley with a small wagon, a tired horse, and a little girl holding onto her mother's coat. "I'm almost finished," Abby called back. Martha looked up at the roof, then at the sky. "That's what you said an hour ago." Abby almost smiled. "I know, you always know." That was Martha's way. She could scold someone and still make it sound like she cared more than anyone else in town. Abby placed the last nail carefully, then climbed down the wooden ladder before Martha could say anything else. The moment Abby stepped inside, she heard the familiar sound of rainwater dripping into a metal bowl. Not rain, melted snow. She looked toward the corner of the kitchen, where the old ceiling had begun to stain. Another repair, another expense, another thing that needed fixing. The boarding house had once been a lively place. Travelers passing through Silver Creek stopped for a warm meal, a clean bed, and Abby's fresh bread. She had built the little business with her own hands after her husband Daniel died 3 years earlier in a wagon accident. She had learned quickly that grief did not stop bills from arriving. It did not stop winter. It did not stop a child from needing shoes that fit. So Abby kept going. She baked before dawn. She washed sheets late into the night. She repaired fences, carried firewood, and smiled at guests even on the days when she had no energy left for herself. Her 10-year-old daughter, Emma, was the reason. "Ma," Abby turned. Emma stood near the stove wrapped in a wool blanket much too large for her. Her dark hair was tied back, and she held a book against her chest. "You're supposed to be resting," Abby said. Emma looked toward the ceiling. "You're supposed to stop climbing roofs," Abby raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like something Martha would say. Maybe Martha is right." Abby laughed softly for a moment. The cold room felt warmer. Then another gust of wind struck the house. The windows rattled. The fire in the stove weakened. Abby walked over and placed another piece of wood inside. Emma watched her quietly. Children noticed more than adults wanted them to. "Are we going to be all right?" Emma asked. Abby looked at her daughter. She knew exactly what Emma was asking. Not about the roof, not about the storm, about everything. Abby knelt beside her. "We've been all right every day before today," she said, "and tomorrow won't be any different." Emma nodded, but she did not look completely convinced. Abby understood. She had become very good at pretending. The truth was, the boarding house was struggling. The roof needed repairs. The back fence had fallen apart. The winter travelers were fewer than usual. Money was getting tighter every week, but Abby Monroe had survived harder things than a leaking roof. At least that was what she told herself. Outside, the storm grew worse. By late afternoon, the valley had nearly disappeared behind a wall of snow. Martha stayed for supper, bringing a small jar of preserves and refusing to accept payment. "You're going to take this," Martha said when Abby tried to argue. "I can pay you next week. You can pay me when you stop trying to carry the whole world by yourself." Abby looked down at the table. "I'm not carrying the whole world." Martha glanced around the small kitchen. "You repaired your own roof today. That's different. You baked 40 loaves of bread yesterday. People need bread. You fixed Mr. Turner's wagon wheel last month." He was struggling. Martha leaned back. "And there it is." Abby looked up. "What? The part where everyone else's problems become your responsibility?" Abby did not answer. Because Martha was right. And Abby did not know how to stop. After Martha left, Abby checked the doors twice before locking them. The storm had become violent, the kind of storm where even experienced ranchers stayed close to home, the kind where a person could disappear on the mountain roads and never be found until spring. Abby was preparing to put Emma to bed when she heard something outside. At first, she thought it was the wind. Then she heard it again, a horse. She froze. Nobody traveled through Silver Creek in weather like this, unless there was a very good reason. She moved toward the window and wiped away the frost with her sleeve. Through the blowing snow, she saw a figure approaching the porch. A tall figure. No, not tall, massive. The man stepped closer, leading a horse through the storm. Snow covered his dark coat and wide-brimmed hat. His shoulders seemed broad enough to block the doorway itself. Emma came beside her. "Who is that?" Abby did not answer. She watched as the stranger reached the porch, but he was not carrying a gun. He was not carrying papers. He was carrying lumber. The man knocked, 3 slow, steady knocks. Abby opened the door only a few inches. The cold air rushed inside. The stranger removed his hat. "Mrs. Monroe?" His voice was deeper than she expected. Calm, careful. "Yes, my name is William Hawthorne." The name stopped her. Everyone in Silver Creek knew William Hawthorne, the mountain giant of Silver Creek, the largest ranch owner in the region. A man with thousands of acres, hundreds of cattle, and a reputation for being impossible to read. Abby tightened her hand around the edge of the door. "What do you want, Mr. Hawthorne?" He glanced at the damaged roof behind her, then back at her. "I came to help." Abby's expression changed. "I don't need charity." For a moment, the storm was the only sound between them. Then Will Hawthorne shook his head. "That's not why I'm here." He looked down at the lumber resting beside him. "I didn't come to buy your boarding house." Abby said nothing. "I didn't come because I think you can't handle your own problems." His eyes met hers. "I came because I saw a house that was falling apart." A pause. "And I thought maybe you'd let me help rebuild it." Abby stared at him. Nobody talked to her that way. People offered sympathy, they offered advice, they offered pity, but this man was standing in the middle of a winter storm holding lumber, asking permission, not assuming, asking. "Why?" Abby finally said. Will looked past her for just a moment, at the warm light inside, at Emma standing quietly near the stove, then back at Abby, because some things are worth fixing before they're lost. The words stayed there between them. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, Abby Monroe stood in her doorway, facing the one man in Silver Creek Valley who had everything a person could want. And somehow, he looked like the one who had been missing something all along. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The storm pressed against the walls of the boarding house, making the old windows tremble in their frames. The fire crackled behind Abby, and the smell of fresh bread still lingered in the kitchen. William Hawthorne stood outside with snow gathering on his shoulders, waiting, not demanding, not expecting, waiting. That was what unsettled Abby the most. Men who came to her door usually wanted something: a room for the night, a hot meal, a favor, a doctor's advice when a child was sick. But William Hawthorne was standing there with lumber in the snow, asking permission to repair a house that did not belong to him. Abby looked past him at the large horse tied near the porch. "You rode through that storm just to tell me you wanted to fix my roof?" Will nodded once. "Yes, that doesn't make much sense, I know." The simple answer caught her off guard. Most people would have explained themselves. They would have tried to convince her. Will only stood there. Abby studied his face. The newspapers from Denver had once described William Hawthorne as one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. A man who owned land stretching across the mountain slopes. A man whose cattle brought in more money than most families would see in a lifetime. But the man standing in front of her did not look like someone chasing wealth. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from hard work. The kind that settled deeper. The kind a person carried quietly. "I appreciate the offer," Abby said finally, "but I can handle my own repairs." Will lowered his eyes briefly toward the damaged roof. "I believe you." The answer was immediate. Again, she expected an argument. She did not get one. "You believe me?" "Yes, then why are you here?" The cowboy looked back at her. "Because being able to do something alone doesn't mean you should have to." Abby felt the words land harder than she wanted them to. She had heard many things since Daniel died. People telling her she was strong. People telling her they admired her. People telling her she had done well raising Emma alone. But sometimes those words felt like another way of saying, "You are alone and everyone knows it." She tightened her grip on the door. "Mr. Hawthorne, I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me." His expression changed slightly. Not anger, something closer to disappointment that she thought that was what he was offering. "I'm not." "Then what are you offering?" Will glanced at the old wooden walls, a chance to make something better. Abby almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it sounded too simple. "You don't even know me. No, you don't know my debts. No, you don't know how many times I've had to patch things because there wasn't enough money to replace them. No." The snow fell between them. "Then why?" Will looked at her for a long moment. "Because I've watched you." Abby became still, not afraid, but cautious. "Watched me, not in the way you're thinking." He removed his gloves slowly. "I pass through town twice a month for supplies. I've seen you open your doors before sunrise. I've seen you give meals to travelers who couldn't pay. I've seen you carry sacks of flour heavier than you should have because you didn't want to ask someone else." Abby looked away. "That doesn't mean anything. It means everything." She did not answer. Will continued. "I've seen people walk past your boarding house every day without noticing what you do." His voice remained calm, but I noticed. The room behind Abby was quiet. Emma stood near the hallway, listening. Abby noticed and gently motioned for her daughter to go back to bed. Emma obeyed, but not before giving Will one curious look. After the door closed behind her, Abby sighed. "My daughter doesn't need strangers making promises." Will nodded. "I agree." The answer surprised her again. "She's already lost her father," Abby continued. "I won't let someone walk into her life for a few weeks and disappear." Something moved across Will's face. A small change, but Abby noticed, because she had spent years learning how to read people. "I understand," he said. "You do?" "Yes," the wind moved around them. "My nephew lost his parents, too." Abby looked at him. "Your nephew, Samuel?" She remembered hearing the name. Everyone in town knew Will lived with his nephew after his brother passed away. He's 12, Will said. Quiet boy, works hard, doesn't complain. There was something in the way he said the boy's name, a softness Abby had not expected from the giant ranch owner everyone described as cold. He's a good kid, Will added. Abby looked toward the storm outside. And you think fixing my roof will help? No. That answer came so quickly she looked back at him. No. No. Will placed one hand on the lumber beside him. Fixing your roof fixes a roof. A pause. But that's not why I came. Abby waited. I came because I think people deserve more than just surviving. The words stayed with her. Before she could answer, another gust of wind pushed through the valley. Will stepped back. I should let you get warm. She expected him to leave. Instead, he lifted the lumber slightly. I'll leave this here. You're not taking it back? No. Why? If you decide you don't want my help, you can use it yourself. Abby stared at him. That was not what she expected. No pressure, no pride, no insistence. Just a man leaving behind something useful and allowing her to choose. Will placed his hat back on his head. Good night, Mrs. Monroe. He turned toward the storm. Mr. Hawthorne. He stopped. Abby hesitated. She did not know why she called him back. Maybe because she was curious. Maybe because she had not expected kindness to arrive looking like a mountain of a man covered in snow. Thank you, she said. Will looked back. For the lumber, he nodded. You're welcome. Then he'd walked into the storm. Abby watched from the doorway until the snow swallowed him. Only after he disappeared did she close the door. Emma came quietly from the hallway. Is he really the richest man in the valley? Abby looked at her. So people say, and he brought wood instead of money. Yes, Emma thought about that. Why? Abby looked at the lumber sitting beside the door. She did not know. That was the truth. She did not know why a man like William Hawthorne would notice a woman like her. The next thing, Silver Creek Valley was already talking. It did not take long. It never did. By the time Abby opened the boarding house kitchen, Martha Collins had already heard the news. Martha walked through the door carrying a basket of eggs. You're going to pretend you don't know what I'm about to ask? Abby continued slicing bread. Yes, Martha set the basket down. William Hawthorne came here during the worst storm of the winter. With lumber, yes, and offered to repair your boarding house. Abby looked up. Yes, Martha stared. That's all you have? Abby returned to the bread. What would you like me to say? I don't know. Maybe that the entire valley is wondering why the mountain giant came knocking on your door. Abby's knife stopped. The entire valley needs a hobby. Martha laughed. There she is. Who? The woman who acts like nothing surprises her. Abby did not answer, because something had surprised her. Not that William Hawthorne had come, not even that he wanted to help. What surprised her was the way he looked at her. Not like a problem, not like someone unfortunate, like someone worth noticing. And that was dangerous, because Abby Monroe had spent 3 years building a life around one simple rule. Never depend on someone staying. That rule had kept her standing. She was not sure she was ready to break it, especially not for a cowboy who looked like he carried his own empty house wherever he went. For the next 3 days, Abby Monroe told herself she had forgotten about William Hawthorne. It was a lie. She thought about him while kneading bread in the early morning. She thought about him while sweeping the wooden floors of the boarding house. She thought about him every time she looked at the stack of lumber sitting neatly beside her porch, untouched since the night he left it there. The strange thing was, Abby had met plenty of men who were kind when they wanted something. She knew the difference. A man might hold a door open because he wanted praise. He might offer help because he expected gratitude. He might say the right words because he wanted a woman to see him a certain way. William Hawthorne had done none of those things. He had simply shown up. That made him harder to understand. On the fourth morning after the storm, Abby was carrying a bucket of water from the well when she noticed a familiar figure standing near the road. Not William, a boy. He was thin, quiet, and dressed in a heavy brown coat that looked slightly too big for him. He stood beside a horse, holding the reins carefully. Abby recognized him after a moment. Samuel Hawthorne, Will's nephew. The boy looked uncomfortable, like he would rather face a mountain storm than knock on someone's door. "Samuel?" Abby called. The boy turned. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was polite but guarded. "What brings you down here?" He looked towards the horse. "My uncle said you might be able to help." Abby set the bucket down. "Is something wrong?" The boy hesitated. That hesitation told Abby more than words could. Children who were used to asking for help usually asked quickly. Children who were not used to it searched for a reason they were allowed to need something. "He cut his hand," Samuel finally said. "Your uncle?" The boy nodded. "No, me." Abby immediately stepped closer. "Let me see." Samuel held out his hand. The injury was not serious, but the cut needed cleaning and wrapping. Abby brought him inside, sat him at the kitchen table, and pulled out her supplies. Samuel watched everything carefully, the way she boiled water, the way she prepared the cloth, the way she moved without rushing. "You don't have to sit so straight," Abby said. Samuel looked at her. "What? You look like you're waiting for a schoolmaster to inspect you." For the first time, something almost like a smile appeared on the boy's face. Almost. "I'm not. You are." "No, ma'am." Abby raised an eyebrow. Samuel looked down. Maybe a little. That was the first crack in the wall. Small, but Abby noticed. She always noticed. While she wrapped his hand, Emma came into the kitchen carrying a book. She stopped when she saw Samuel. "This is the boy from the Hawthorne ranch?" Samuel looked at her. "Yes," Emma studied him. "You're taller than I expected." Samuel blinked. "What? I heard your uncle was the biggest man in the mountains, so I assumed you'd be bigger too." Abby closed her eyes briefly. "Emma." "What?" "I'm just saying." Samuel looked confused. Then something surprising happened. He laughed. Not loudly, not for long, but he laughed. Abby looked up because she had heard something in that sound, something that seemed unfamiliar to the boy himself. Emma smiled. "You do know how to laugh." Samuel immediately became serious again. "Yes, you should do it more, Emma." The girl shrugged. "What?" Abby tried not to smile. Samuel looked away, but there was a small change in his expression. A little less distance, a little less loneliness. That afternoon when Will came to collect him, Abby understood why he had come himself instead of sending someone else. The large rancher stopped outside the boarding house, his horse tied near the fence. He looked different than he had during the storm, less like a stranger, more like a man who had been thinking. "Mrs. Monroe, Mr. Hawthorne." Samuel stepped outside. "I'm ready." Will looked at the boy's wrapped hand. "Does it hurt?" "No." Abby glanced at him. Samuel immediately corrected himself. "A little." Will nodded. "That sounds more honest." The boy looked at him, then looked away. But Abby noticed. The boy listened to him, not because he was afraid, because he trusted him. Will turned toward Abby. "Thank you. It was a small cut. That's not what I meant." Abby looked at him. Will glanced briefly toward Samuel. He doesn't usually let people help, Abby understood. "He's a good boy." Will's expression softened. "Yes." A quiet moment passed. Then Abby noticed something. Will looked at his nephew the same way she looked at Emma, like the child was the most important thing in the world. That changed something. She had expected a wealthy ranch owner, a powerful man, someone used to commanding people. Instead, she saw a man who worried about a 12-year-old boy's injured hand. "Your ranch is far from here?" Abby asked. "About an hour and a half by horse. That's a long way for a cut finger." Will looked slightly embarrassed. He wanted to come. Samuel immediately looked away. Abby almost smiled. She knew that look, the look of a child who had been caught caring. Will reached for the reins. Before leaving, he stopped. "I'll return the favor," Abby frowned. "There's no favor. You helped him. That's what I do." Will held her gaze. Yes, something about the way he said it made her pause. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he had noticed something about her that most people missed. He tipped his hat. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Monroe." Then he and Samuel rode away. Abby watched them disappear down the road. Emma stepped beside her. "You like him." Abby looked down. "Don't start. I didn't say anything bad. That's usually when you say something dangerous." Emma smiled. "He looks at you differently." Abby became quiet. "Different how?" The girl thought for a moment. "Like he sees you." The words were simple, but they stayed. That evening, after the dishes were washed and the guests had gone to their rooms, Abby sat alone near the stove. The boarding house was quiet. Too quiet. She looked around. The same walls, the same wooden table, the same chair where Daniel used to sit. She still missed him. She always would. But lately, another thought had started appearing. A thought she quickly pushed away. What if missing someone did not mean there was no room for anyone else? Abby shook her head. That was dangerous thinking. The next morning, she found a small package sitting beside her porch. Inside was a pair of new gloves. Not expensive, not fancy, just sturdy work gloves. There was a note attached. The handwriting was simple. "Mrs. Monroe for the roof repairs." W.H. Abby stared at the note. She looked down the empty road. William Hawthorne had not asked for thanks. He had not waited around to see her reaction. He had simply noticed something she needed and left it behind. Later that afternoon, Abby walked into Martha Collins' general store. Martha looked up immediately. "You saw the gloves." Abby stopped. "How do you know?" "Because half the town knows before the person involved does," Abby sighed. "Martha, I'm only saying." "Don't," Martha smiled. "Fine." A pause. Then, "But I will say this." Abby looked at her. "Be careful." Abby nodded. "I know." "No," Martha said softly. "I don't mean be careful of him." That caught Abby's attention. Martha leaned against the counter. "I mean, be careful of convincing yourself you don't deserve something good, just because life was unfair before." Abby looked down at the gloves in her hands. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say she was fine. She wanted to say she had survived without anyone. And all of that was true. But standing there in the quiet general store, holding a pair of gloves from a man who had crossed a frozen valley just to repair a roof, Abby found herself unable to say it. Because somewhere high in the San Juan Mountains, William Hawthorne lived in a house big enough for a family. And somehow, from everything she had heard, it sounded like the loneliest house in Colorado territory. Abby Monroe tried not to think about that. She failed. The problem was not William Hawthorne himself. The problem was that he had become difficult to ignore. A man like that should have been easy to dismiss. He was wealthy, powerful, known across the territory, the kind of man people spoke about when they talked about land, cattle, and success. But every time Abby thought of him, she remembered smaller things. The way he waited outside her door instead of walking in. The way he asked before helping. The way he looked at Samuel when the boy was not paying attention. Those details bothered her more than any grand gesture could have, because grand gestures were easy. Kindness in small moments was harder to fake. 2 weeks passed after the storm. The weather softened slightly, though the mountains still held on to winter. The roads remained muddy and uneven, with wagon wheels leaving deep tracks through the frozen ground. Abby kept busy. She always did. She repaired curtains in the upstairs rooms. She baked cinnamon rolls for travelers passing through town. She balanced the boarding house accounts every Sunday evening by the light of a small oil lamp. And every morning, when she stepped outside, she saw the stack of lumber still sitting beside the porch. waiting, just like the man who brought it. She had not seen Will since the day he brought Samuel. That should have made things easier. Instead, she found herself wondering why. Then, one Thursday morning, she heard a wagon outside. Not a passing wagon, a wagon that stopped. Abby wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch. William Hawthorne climbed down from that seat. He wore a dark work coat, worn boots, and the same quiet expression he always carried. Behind him was a toolbox. Abby immediately folded her arms. "Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Monroe." She looked at the tools, then at him. "I didn't ask you to come." "No." The answer made her pause. "Again." "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Agreeing with me." Will looked confused. "Should I not?" Abby almost smiled. "No. Most people argue when they want something." He looked toward the damaged porch steps. "I'm not most people." "That much is clear." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Will picked up his toolbox. "I'm going to repair the step." Abby's expression changed. "No," he stopped. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, Mr. Hawthorne." "Will." She hesitated. "Will." The name felt unfamiliar. "Too familiar," she continued. "But I don't need a man showing up and fixing everything because he thinks I can't handle my own life." Something shifted in his face. Not anger, understanding. "Abby." It was the first time he had used her first name, she noticed. He noticed that she noticed. Neither mentioned it. "I don't think you can't handle your life," he said. "Then what do you think?" Will looked at the broken step. "I think you've been handling everything for too long." The words were quiet, but they struck harder than she expected. Abby looked away, because that was too close to the truth. "I survived before you came here. I raised my daughter alone. Yes, I kept this place running. Yes." She looked back at him. "Then why?" "We'll set the toolbox down." For the first time since Abby had met him, he looked uncertain, not weak, just careful, "Because I know you can stand alone." A pause. "I'm asking if you'd let someone stand beside you." The wind moved through the valley. Somewhere down the road, a horse pulled a wagon past the general store. Silver Creek continued on around them, but Abby felt strangely still. She had spent years hearing people tell her what she needed. A smaller house, a different life, a different attitude. Nobody had ever asked what she wanted. "You don't know what you're asking," she said. Will looked at her. "I think I do." "No." Her voice softened. "You don't." She looked toward the boarding house. "Daniel and I built this place together." Will said nothing. "When he died, everything changed overnight. I had a child who needed me. Bills that didn't care about grief. A business that couldn't stop because my heart was broken." Her hand rested against the porch railing. "So I learned something." "What?" "That depending on someone is dangerous." Will was quiet. Then he nodded. "I know." Abby looked at him. "You know? My brother died 3 years ago," she remembered. Samuel Will continued. "I thought if I worked hard enough, built enough, provided enough, I could make sure Samuel never felt what I felt." He looked toward the mountains. "I was wrong." The honesty in his voice made Abby stop. "What happened?" "He got a house." A pause. "A ranch." Another pause. "Everything he needed." Will looked back at her. Except a home, Abby had no answer, because she understood that more than she wanted to. That evening, Will repaired the porch step, not because Abby agreed. She did not completely. But she also did not stop him. She stood near the doorway while he measured the wood carefully, replacing the damaged board with one from the lumber pile. Emma sat on the porch watching. "Why does he work so quietly?" she whispered. Abby glanced at her. "I don't know. He doesn't talk like other men." "No," Emma considered this. I think I like that. Abby looked at her daughter. You barely know him. I know. Emma watched Will tighten a screw, but he listens. That simple observation stayed with Abby. When Will finished, he stepped back and looked at the repaired porch. There, Abby looked down. The step was stronger than before. You did a good job. Will nodded. Thank you. She frowned. For what? For saying so. That answer surprised her. You're welcome. He picked up his tools. Good night, Abby, again. Her name. This time she did not correct him. Good night, Will. He walked toward his horse, then stopped. Without turning around, he said, Tomorrow I'm fixing the back fence. Abby blinked. I didn't agree to that. No, you're impossible. A small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I've been told. Then he rode away. The next morning he returned. And the day after that, he repaired the fence. He replaced a loose window frame. He stacked firewood beside the kitchen door before the next cold front arrived. He never acted like Abby owed him anything. He never mentioned what he did. And somehow, that made it harder for her to resist. One afternoon, Abby found him standing beside the back fence, looking over the valley. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Will turned. No. She shook her head. I'm serious, so am I. The answer almost made her laugh. Almost. Instead, she looked down. People are going to talk. They already do. You don't care? No. Why? Will looked at her. Because people who don't know your heart are not the people I'm trying to impress. The silence that followed felt different. Not uncomfortable, just full. Abby looked toward the mountains. You're making this difficult. I know, you know? Yes. She looked back at him. Most men would tell me they understand. I do understand. No, you don't. Will waited. She took a breath. You're asking me to believe someone can stay. His expression softened. I'm asking you to let me try. That was the dangerous part, not the promise, the attempt. Because Abby knew how much it hurt when someone tried and failed. She knew what it felt like to build a life around someone's absence. She looked at the man standing in front of her. The man everyone in town thought had everything, and somehow, she was beginning to see the truth. He had a ranch, he had money, he had land stretching into the mountains, but he had no one waiting for him when he came home. Will stepped closer, but not too close. Never too close. Bye. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to forget Daniel. Her expression changed. I would never ask that. A pause. I'm not asking you to become someone else. The wind moved through the trees. I'm asking for a chance to build something with the woman you already are. Abby looked at him for a long moment. Then she whispered, What exactly are you asking? Will took a slow breath, and for the first time, the confident ranch owner looked nervous. I'm asking you to let me build your house. She stared at him. He continued, not just the walls. His voice lowered, the life inside them. Abby felt her heart move before she could stop it. I can't promise you that. I know. I can't promise I won't be afraid. I know. I can't promise this won't hurt. Will nodded. I know. The honesty of that answer left her with nothing to fight against, because he was not promising a perfect future. He was only offering to walk toward it with her. Finally, Abby looked away. I need time, Will nodded. Take it, no disappointment, no pressure, just acceptance. He picked up his tools and walked toward his horse. Abby watched him leave. And for the first time in 3 years, she wondered if being alone had become less of a choice and more of a habit. That night, after Emma was asleep, Abby stood by the window. The moonlight covered the valley. Far away, beyond the dark line of the mountains, was Hawthorne Ranch, The empty house, the silent rooms, the man who had everything except the one thing he wanted most. A family, and Abby hated that she understood him, because understanding him meant she was beginning to care. And caring was the one thing she had promised herself she would never risk again. For several days after Will Hawthorne's words, Abby Monroe tried to return to normal. She failed. Normal had become more difficult. The boarding house still needed cleaning. The bakery still needed flour. Guests still arrived with muddy boots and tired faces, asking if there was a room available and something warm to eat. Life continued. But now there was the cowboy who appeared at the edge of that life, not loudly, not demanding attention, just present. Some mornings Abby would find fresh firewood stacked beside the kitchen door. Some afternoons, she would notice a loose board had been repaired before she even realized it was broken. Will never mentioned those things. That almost bothered her more. A person who wanted praise usually made sure you knew what they had done. Will Hawthorne simply did things and walked away, and that made Abby wonder what kind of man he truly was. The answer came sooner than she expected, because Silver Creek Valley noticed everything, especially anything unusual. And William Hawthorne showing up at Abigail Monroe's boarding house was very unusual. The first whispers began at the general store. They always did. Martha Collins heard them before Abby did. She was arranging jars of preserves on a shelf when two women near the counter lowered their voices. "I still don't understand it," one said. "Understand what, William Hawthorne?" Martha stopped moving. The woman continued. "He could choose anyone." The other woman nodded. "That's what I mean." Martha knew where this was going. She had heard that tone before. The tone people used when they believed they were discussing someone's future while pretending they were only discussing the weather. "What exactly are you both trying to understand?" Martha asked. The women turned. "Oh, nothing," Martha smiled. "That usually means something." One of them adjusted her gloves. "We're only saying it seems strange." "What does? That a man like William Hawthorne would spend so much time around Abby Monroe?" Martha folded her arms. "And why is that strange?" The woman hesitated. "Because saying the truth out loud would make it sound cruel. Because they're different." Martha looked at her. "Everyone is different. You know what I mean." Martha did, and she disliked it. She had watched Abby work harder than almost anyone in town. She had watched her raise Emma after losing Daniel. She had watched her go without new clothes so her daughter could have a proper coat. She had watched people accept Abby's kindness while forgetting Abby was a person too. "Maybe William Hawthorne sees something you don't," Martha said. The women exchanged a look. Then one of them shrugged. Perhaps, but Martha knew that word. Perhaps was often what people said when they meant no. By the time Abby walked into the store that afternoon, the conversation had already spread. She knew before Martha said anything. She could feel it. People looked longer. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. That old feeling returned, the one she knew too well, being noticed, but not truly seen. "Abby," Martha's voice pulled her back. She looked up. "What?" Martha studied her face. "You've heard." Abby gave a small smile. "I've lived in a small town for years, Martha. I know how it works." Martha leaned against the counter. "You don't have to listen to them." "I know." "You really know." Abby looked at the shelves of goods around them. "I learned a long time ago that people will always have something to say. That doesn't mean they should." "No." Abby picked up a bag of flour. "But it means I shouldn't let them decide how I live." Martha smiled slightly. "There she is." Abby looked confused. "Who?" "The Abby Monroe I know." But even Martha could see it. The words had not disappeared just because Abby spoke strongly. They had landed somewhere, and Abby carried them home. 2 days later, she went to the Saturday market. Silver Creek's market was usually the busiest place in town. Farmers sold vegetables and eggs. Ranchers traded supplies. Children ran between wagons while their parents called after them. Abby liked the market. It reminded her that life was still happening, that she was part of something. until she heard Eleanor Whitman's voice. Abigail, Abby turned. Eleanor stood near a table of fabrics, dressed in a fine blue coat that looked more suited for Denver than Silver Creek. Eleanor was the daughter of one of the wealthiest ranch owners in the territory. She had grown up with comfort, with choices, with the kind of confidence that came from never wondering whether there would be enough. Eleanor. A polite greeting. Nothing more. Eleanor smiled. I hope you don't mind me saying something. Abby almost laughed, because nobody ever said that unless they intended to say it anyway. Go ahead. Eleanor glanced around. Several people were nearby. That was probably not an accident. I just worry that people may misunderstand what is happening. Abby held the basket in her hand. What is happening? Eleanor lowered her voice. William is a good man. And he is lonely. Abby said nothing. Eleanor continued. Sometimes lonely people make decisions because they want to fill an empty space. There it was. The suggestion, the doubt. Abby felt it immediately. You think that's what he's doing? I think he has lost a great deal. So have I. Eleanor paused. That is true. The words sounded almost like agreement. But then she continued. And I know this may not be pleasant to hear, but William's position in this valley is important. People notice who stands beside him. Abby looked at her, and Eleanor hesitated. You are a good woman, a familiar phrase, a dangerous one, but Eleanor looked away briefly. But perhaps kindness is not the same thing as love. For a moment, Abby felt the market disappear, the voices, the horses, the footsteps, all of it. Because those words touched the exact fear she had been trying not to admit. What if Eleanor was right? What if Will was only looking for someone to repair the emptiness in his home? What if Abby was only convenient? She forced herself to answer. Thank you for your concern. Eleanor looked surprised. I mean it sincerely. I believe you. That was the strange part. Abby did believe she meant it, but sometimes people could be sincere and still cause harm. Abby walked away. She finished her shopping. She returned home. And she did what she always did when something hurt. She worked. She cleaned the kitchen. She organized the pantry. She baked until her hands ached, anything to avoid thinking. That evening, Will arrived. He carried a small box of nails and a replacement hinge for the back door. Abby saw him through the window. For a moment, she considered pretending she was not home. Then she hated herself for thinking it. So she opened the door. Good evening. Will noticed immediately. He always noticed. Something about him had changed. Or maybe something about her had. Are you all right? I'm fine. The answer came too quickly. Will was quiet. Abby looked away. That's what people say when they don't want to explain. A small silence. Then Abby sighed. People are talking. Will nodded. I expected that. You did? Yes. Then why keep coming? The question came out sharper than she intended. Will did not react. He simply looked at her. Because I'm not building this house for them. The words stopped her. This house? Will glanced at the boarding house. Not just the boards. He looked back at her. The trust. Abby swallowed. That's the problem. What? I don't know how to trust that. Will was silent. For once, he did not immediately answer. He looked down at the tools in his hand, then back at her. I don't blame you. That surprised her. You don't? No. A pause. People leave. The words were quiet. Too quiet. Abby looked at him. Will continued. I know. She saw something then. Something behind the strength, behind the size, behind the reputation. A man who knew exactly what it felt like to lose someone. You lost your wife. He nodded. Yes, and your brother. Abby lowered her voice. Then why are you not afraid? Will looked toward the darkening mountains. I am. The honesty caught her. I just decided fear doesn't get to make every choice. The wind moved through the valley. Neither of them spoke. Then Will placed the box of nails on the porch. I'll leave these here. You're not staying? No. She looked at him. Why? Because I think you need to know something. He stepped back. I want to be here. A pause. But I don't want you to feel trapped. Abby looked at the man in front of her. The man everyone thought had everything. And somehow, he was the first person who seemed determined not to take anything from her. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. Then he walked away. Abby stood in the doorway long after he left. The town could talk, Eleanor could doubt, even Abby herself could be afraid. But one thing was becoming impossible to ignore. William Hawthorne was not asking her to become someone else. He was asking if she would let him know who she already was. And that frightened her more than anything. Because for the first time in years, Abby Monroe was no longer wondering if she could survive alone. She was wondering what life might look like if she did not have to. That question followed her everywhere. It followed her while she kneaded bread before sunrise. It followed her while she swept the wooden floors of the boarding house. It followed her when Emma sat at the kitchen table, swinging her feet beneath the chair and watching her mother with the careful eyes of a child who noticed more than adults realized. Mama? Abby looked up from the stack of folded linens. Yes, sweetheart? Are we going somewhere? The question caught her off guard. Why would you ask that? Emma shrugged. Because you keep looking at the same spot on the wall. Abby glanced toward the empty space above the fireplace. She had not even realized she was doing it. I suppose I have been thinking about Mr. Hawthorne. Abby nearly dropped the towel in her hands. Emma. The girl smiled slightly. I didn't say anything bad. I know. He seems nice. Abby folded the towel carefully. He is. Then why do you look worried? Children had a way of asking questions adults spent years avoiding. Abby sat beside her daughter. Sometimes something good can feel frightening. Emma thought about that, like riding a horse for the first time, exactly like that, but you still ride. Abby smiled. Yes. Why? Because eventually you have to decide if you're more afraid of falling or afraid of never trying. Emma nodded like she was storing the words away for later. Then she reached across the table and took her mother's hand. I think you should try. Abby looked at her daughter. 10 years old, small hands, a heart bigger than the whole valley. You're supposed to be worried about your schoolwork, Abby said. Emma grinned. I can worry about both. For the first time that morning, Abby laughed. And she did not notice the small shadow of a horse passing by the window. She did not notice Will Hawthorne watching the warmth inside the boarding house before quietly riding away. He had not come to interrupt. He had learned that some moments were not meant to be entered. They were meant to be respected. Days later, Will came with an invitation, not a gift, not an offer, an invitation. Abby found him standing beside the fence outside the boarding house, holding his hat in his hands. That alone told her something. Most men in Silver Creek approached him with caution because of his size and reputation, but Will Hawthorne seemed most careful when he was near her. Good afternoon, Abby said. Good afternoon, a pause. Then Will cleared his throat. I was wondering if you and Emma would like to visit the ranch. Abby looked toward the mountains. Ranch? He nodded. I thought Emma might like to see the horses. That's kind of you. She's curious. Abby smiled faintly. She asks a lot of questions. So does Samuel. That surprised her. You mean your nephew? Yes. Abby had heard about Samuel. Everyone had. A quiet boy, 12 years old, lost his parents young, raised by an uncle who was more comfortable fixing fences than speaking about feelings. He would like meeting Emma, Will said. You think so? I do. The answer came quickly. Abby noticed. You sound certain. Will looked toward the mountains. He needs someone his age who doesn't look at him like he's broken. The words stayed with her because she understood them. More than he knew. Tomorrow? He asked. Abby hesitated. Not because she did not want to go, because she did. And that was exactly why she hesitated. Finally, she nodded. Tomorrow. The ride to Hawthorne Ranch took nearly an hour. The road climbed higher into the San Juan Mountains, winding past pine trees covered in fresh snow. The wagon wheels moved carefully over frozen patches of earth, and the cold air carried the smell of wood smoke from distant cabins. Emma pressed her face near the window. Look, Abby smiled. I see. No, really look. Abby followed her daughter's gaze. At the top of the ridge stood the Hawthorne Ranch. It was larger than she expected, much larger. Tall wooden fences stretched across the valley. Cattle moved slowly through the snow-covered fields. A large barn stood near the main house, its doors wide enough for several wagons to pass through. But the first thing Abby noticed was not the size. It was the quiet. A ranch that large should have sounded alive. Instead, it felt like it was waiting. Will helped them down from the wagon. Emma looked around. Does anyone else live here? Will glanced towards the house. Just us. The answer seemed heavier than it should have. Inside, Abby expected elegance. Instead, she found warmth without life. The furniture was sturdy, the floors were polished, the fireplace was large. Everything was cared for. But there were spaces that felt untouched. A chair near the window with no one sitting in it. A bookshelf with several empty places. A dining table long enough for a dozen people, with only 3 plates usually set. Samuel appeared from the hallway. He stopped when he saw them. Will placed a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder. Samuel, this is Abby Monroe and her daughter Emma. Samuel nodded. Ma'am. Hello, Samuel, Emma smiled. Do you like horses? The boy looked surprised by the question. Then he nodded. Yeah. What's your favorite? Samuel thought. The gray mare. Why? He looked toward the window. She doesn't trust everyone. Emma tilted her head. Maybe she just needs time. Samuel looked at her, and for the first time, Abby saw the boy almost smile. Later, Abby helped in the kitchen while Will prepared coffee. She noticed something strange. The kitchen had everything. Pots, pans, fresh supplies. A large table, but it looked like nobody used it. Will? He looked up. Yes, did you build this kitchen? He nodded. Years ago, for your wife? His hand stopped for just a moment. Yes, Abby lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. No. His voice was gentle. It's all right. He looked around the room. Margaret always said a kitchen was the heart of a home. Abby touched the edge of the wooden counter. She was right. Will nodded. She wanted this place full someday. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was honest. Abby looked toward the dining room. The house is beautiful. Will gave a small smile, but she hesitated. But it feels like everyone left before they arrived. The words hung between them. Will did not become angry. He did not defend the ranch. He simply looked down. That's because they did. Abby looked at him. My brother died first. His fingers tightened around the coffee mug. Then Margaret. A quiet breath. After that, I kept building. Why? He looked toward the windows where the mountains stood beneath the pale afternoon sky. I thought if I made everything strong enough, I wouldn't lose anything else. Abby understood. Because she had done something similar. She had built walls too, just smaller ones, around a smaller house, around a smaller heart. Will looked back at her. I know what people think. What do they think? That I have everything. Abby said nothing, because she had heard the same thing about herself. That she was lucky to have a roof, that she should be grateful, that wanting more was foolish. Will set the mug down, but a person can have a full barn and still hear an empty house. The words were quiet, and somehow they hurt more than anything loud could have. That evening, when Abby and Emma prepared to leave, Samuel stood near the porch. "Will?" The boy rarely spoke first. Everyone noticed. "Les? Can they come again?" Will looked at Abby, then Emma. Abby saw the question in his eyes, not pressure, not expectation, just hope. "We would like that," she said. Samuel nodded, a small movement, but meaningful. As they rode away from Hawthorne Ranch, Abby looked back. Will stood on the porch beside the empty doorway, the largest rancher in Silver Creek Valley. The man people believed had everything, and suddenly Abby understood something she had not before. Will Hawthorne was not searching for someone to fill a house. He was searching for someone who could make it feel like a home again. And somehow, that frightened her more, because she was beginning to realize she did not only want to be invited inside, she wanted to belong there. And that frightened Abby Monroe more than the coldest winter night in Silver Creek Valley ever had. For years, she had known exactly what her life was supposed to be. Wake before sunrise, light the stove, bake bread, count every coin twice, make sure Emma had enough food, warm clothes, and a reason to smile. Her world was small, but it was steady. Then William Hawthorne arrived with a wagon full of lumber and a question she never expected anyone to ask. Not how much do you need, not how much will you sell for, but what would it take for you to let someone stand beside you? Abby had spent years protecting herself from disappointment, yet every time Will showed up at her door, he somehow made that protection feel less like strength and more like a wall she had forgotten how to open. For a few weeks, life in Silver Creek Valley carried a strange kind of peace. Will continued visiting the boarding house. Sometimes he brought supplies from the ranch, a sack of flour, fresh eggs, a jar of honey from a neighbor's bees. Small things. Nothing that made Abby feel indebted. That was what she noticed most. Will never arrived as a man who thought he was rescuing her. He arrived as a man who simply wanted to help carry something heavy. One afternoon, Abby found him repairing the loose hinge on the back gate. She stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee in her hand. "And, you know," she said, "I was capable of fixing that." Will tightened the final screw. "I know." She raised an eyebrow. "You do?" He nodded. "Yes, then why are you fixing it?" He looked at the gate, because it needed fixing. Abby tried not to smile. "That's your answer for everything. It usually works." She shook her head. "You are a difficult man to argue with." Will glanced toward her. "I've been told." "By who? My nephew?" That made her laugh. A real laugh, the kind she rarely allowed herself anymore. Will watched her for a moment, not staring, not making her uncomfortable, just noticing. And somehow that made it harder, because Abby had spent years being noticed for the wrong reasons. People noticed her size, her old dress, her small house, her lack of money. Will noticed whether she had eaten breakfast, whether the porch steps were safe, whether Emma had a new pair of gloves before winter arrived. The difference was something she did not know how to handle. But not everyone in Silver Creek Valley saw things the way Will did, and by the end of that month, the entire town knew about them. It started at Martha Collins's general store. It always did. The store sat near the center of town, with wooden shelves packed with canned goods, fabric rolls, lamp oil, and bags of coffee beans. Martha was arranging jars of preserves when two ranch hands walked in. "You hear about Hawthorne?" one of them asked. Martha looked up. "Hear what?" The man picked up a bag of tobacco from the counter. "He's been spending a lot of time at Monroe's place." Martha's eyes narrowed. "And?" The second man shrugged. "And nothing. Just saying." Martha knew that tone, the tone people used when they wanted to say something cruel without accepting responsibility for it. "Then say something useful," she replied. The men exchanged looks. Martha turned back to her shelves. Thought so, but whispers moved faster than wagons. Within days, people had opinions. Some thought Will had lost his mind. Some thought Abby had somehow convinced him she was different. Some thought it was only a matter of time before he changed his mind. Abby heard those whispers. She pretended she did not. That was something she had become very good at. One morning, she walked into the Silver Creek diner to pick up a fresh loaf of bread she had traded for breakfast supplies. The conversation near the window stopped when she entered. Not completely, just enough. Enough for her to notice. Enough for her to understand. At the table sat Eleanor Whitman, daughter of one of the wealthiest ranch owners in the territory. Eleanor wore a blue dress with fine stitching and carried herself like someone who had never needed to question whether she belonged somewhere. She looked at Abby and offered a polite smile, the kind that carried no warmth. Abigail dodged Eleanor. A few years earlier, Abby might have lowered her eyes, and that day she did not. Eleanor folded her hands. I hope you don't misunderstand what people are saying. Abby held the bread basket tighter. People say many things. Yes. Eleanor looked toward the window. Especially when someone like William makes an unexpected choice. The words were gentle. That made them worse. Abby stayed quiet. Eleanor continued. Will has always been generous, sometimes too generous. Abby looked at her. Are you saying his kindness is a mistake? Eleanor paused. I'm saying kindness and love are not always the same thing. The room seemed quieter. Abby felt the weight of every person pretending not to listen. I should get back to work. She turned away. Abigail, she stopped. Eleanor's voice softened. I mean no harm. Abby looked over her shoulder. Sometimes people say that right before they cause it. Then she left. Outside, the cold air hit her face. She stood beside her wagon for a moment longer than necessary, because the hardest words were not the cruel ones. The hardest words were the ones that sounded reasonable. That night, Will arrived at the boarding house. He immediately noticed something was different. Abby was polite. Too polite. You're quiet, he said. I'm tired. He looked at her, not accusing, just knowing. You heard something. Abby looked away. Everyone has something to say. Will stepped closer. She sighed. I don't want you fighting my battles. I wasn't going to. That surprised her, no? He shook his head. No. Why? Because you don't need me to fight for you. The answer caught her. Will looked toward the old porch. I just need you to know. No, I'm not ashamed to stand here. Those words should have comforted her. Instead, they hurt, because part of Abby wondered if maybe she was the one who was ashamed, not of herself, of wanting something, of hoping, of believing a man like Will Hawthorne could truly choose her. The following week, Abby began pulling away, not suddenly, not dramatically, just small changes. She stopped walking with Will after Sunday church. She stopped inviting him inside for coffee when he offered help repairing the boarding house fence. She said she could manage, and Will accepted every answer without complaint. That somehow made it harder. One evening, Emma found her mother sitting alone at the kitchen table. The room was dark except for the lantern. Mama, Abby looked up. Yes, did you and Mr. Hawthorne argue? No, then why does it feel like you're saying goodbye? Abby looked down. Children saw things adults tried to hide. I just don't want him to regret choosing us. Emma walked closer. He doesn't look like someone who regrets things. Abby smiled sadly. You don't know that, Emma thought for a moment. I think he does. Does what? Choose. The simple answer stayed with Abby long after Emma went to bed. But before Abby could decide what she wanted, a new rider came into Silver Creek Valley, a man with a polished coat, a clean hat, and papers tied neatly inside a leather folder. His name was Caleb Thornton. Most people knew him as a successful cattle investor, a man who bought struggling ranches and turned them into profitable operations. He arrived at the Hawthorne Ranch just before sunset. Will met him near the front gate. Caleb, William. The two men shook hands, but neither smiled. "I'm here about your land boundary," Caleb said. Will looked at the papers. "What boundary?" Caleb opened the folder. "According to these documents, a section of your northern property line may have been incorrectly recorded." Will's expression changed. "How long have you known about this?" Caleb adjusted his gloves. "Long enough." The wind moved through the mountain grass. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Caleb looked toward the ranch. "Beautiful place you have here." Will said nothing. Caleb smiled slightly. Would be a shame to lose part of it. After he rode away, Will stood at the gate for a long time. The papers remained in his hand, and for the first time in weeks, Abby's fears were no longer only about whether she belonged beside him. They were about whether there would still be a place for them to stand at all. The morning after Caleb Thornton arrived at Hawthorne Ranch, Silver Creek Valley felt different. The mountains looked the same. The snow still rested on the pine branches. The creek still moved beneath a thin layer of ice, but people spoke in lower voices. They watched the road more carefully, and every time someone mentioned William Hawthorne's name, there was a pause afterward, the kind of pause that came before bad news. Abby heard about the land dispute from Martha Collins. She was arranging jars of beans and coffee on the shelves of the general store when Martha saw Abby walk through the door. "You heard?" Abby stopped. "Heard what?" Martha sighed. "That Caleb Thornton rode out to Hawthorne Ranch." Abby's hand tightened around the list of supplies she carried. "Will told me. And he said there was a problem with the northern boundary." Martha placed a jar on the shelf. "Caleb Thornton has been looking at that land for months." Abby looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because men like him don't suddenly become interested in a piece of ground overnight." Martha lowered her voice. "He's been asking questions, buying old records, speaking with people who own land near the mountain roots." Abby looked toward the front window. Outside, a wagon rolled past slowly. "I thought he only wanted Will's ranch." Martha shook her head. "That's what makes men like him dangerous. They rarely want only one thing." Abby said nothing. Her mind returned to the evening Will stood on the porch. The way he had looked at the mountains, the way he had carried the weight of that ranch without saying a word. For the first time, she wondered if maybe she had misunderstood something. Maybe Will had not only been fighting to build a future, maybe he had been fighting to keep the one thing he had left. That afternoon, Abby rode to Hawthorne Ranch. She told herself she was bringing fresh bread. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. She needed to see him. Will was in the ranch office when she arrived. The small wooden building stood behind the main house, surrounded by stacked firewood and old fence posts waiting for repairs. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his eyes moved to the basket in her hand. "Bread?" Abby nodded. Still warm, a faint smile touched his face. "That's dangerous." "Why?" "Because now I have to admit, I was hoping you'd bring some." She looked down, hiding a smile. But the moment did not last. The papers on his desk caught her attention. Maps, property records, receipts, letters, everything carefully arranged. "What did Caleb show you?" Will leaned back in his chair. "Claims that part of the northern ridge may not legally belong to me." "Do you believe him?" "No." The answer came immediately. "But," Will looked toward the window, "but he came prepared." Abby stepped closer. "How long has this been happening?" A silence followed. "Too long, Will." He looked back. 3 months, Abby frowned. 3 months? I didn't want people worrying. Or you didn't want me worrying. His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger, something else, something closer to guilt. "I didn't want you thinking my life was only trouble." The words surprised her. because they sounded less like a rancher speaking, and more like a man afraid someone might leave. Abby set the basket down. Will. He looked at her. You need to stop deciding what I can handle. The room went quiet. Will did not answer. She continued. I am not a guest you need to protect from every storm. His eyes stayed on hers. I know. Do you? A long moment passed. Then he nodded. Yes, that simple answer softened something in her. Not everything, but something. She walked toward the desk. What records do you have? Will looked confused. Records? Yes. Abby, this is a legal dispute, I know. You don't have to involve yourself. She looked at him. There was no anger in her face. Only certainty, I know, that stopped him. Because she was saying the same thing he always said. I know, and yet she was staying. The next morning, Abby began searching, not because she believed she could solve everything, not because she thought she understood land law, but because she understood something else. People. And people left traces. Her late husband Daniel had worked with merchants and ranchers before the accident. He kept careful records, receipts, invoices, letters. He had always said a piece of paper could tell a story if someone knew how to read it. For 3 days, Abby searched through the old wooden trunk beneath her bed. Emma watched from the doorway. What are you looking for? Something your father saved. Do you think you'll find it? Abby smiled faintly. Your father was stubborn. Emma nodded. He was. Then there's a good chance. Inside the trunk were years of memories, a worn pocket watch, old business receipts, a faded photograph, and finally, a bundle of papers tied with string. Abby carefully opened them. Most were ordinary, trade agreements, supply lists, notes between ranchers. Then she found something unusual. A letter, written 4 years earlier. The name at the bottom made her sit still. Caleb Thornton. She read it once, then again. The letter was not about Will, it was about another rancher 2 counties away. A warning, a dispute, a claim that Caleb had questioned the same kind of boundary records before taking control of valuable land. Abby's heart began beating faster, not because she had found an answer, because she had found a pattern. She rode to Martha's store with the documents wrapped safely in cloth. Martha read through them carefully. Where did you get these? My husband's records. Martha looked up. Abby, I know. No, you don't. Martha placed the letter down. This could be important. Abby looked at the papers. Could? Martha nodded. Could. But we need someone who understands the law. That evening, Abby returned to Hawthorne Ranch. Will was outside near the barn, repairing a saddle strap. He looked up as she approached. You found something. She smiled slightly. How did you know? Because you're walking faster than usual. That made her laugh quietly. Then she handed him the papers. Will read them. His expression changed slowly. Not excitement, not victory, something more careful. Hope mixed with caution. Abby, I'm not saying this proves everything. He looked at her. I know. She smiled. Good. Then you're learning. For the first time in days, Will almost laughed. He looked back at the papers. You didn't have to do this. Yes. His eyes lifted. Yes, I did. The words surprised both of them, because they were different now. Before, Will had been the one standing beside her. Now she was standing beside him, not because she needed his protection, not because she owed him anything, because she chose to. Later that night, they sat near the ranch fireplace. Sam was reading in the corner. Emma was showing him a small drawing she had made. 2 children, a house, a mountain. Will watched them quietly. Abby noticed. What? He shook his head. Nothing. That usually means something. A small smile appeared. I was just thinking. About what? He looked around the room, then back at her. That I spent years building walls. Abby waited. And somehow, you're the first person who ever walked through them without asking. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the wind moved across the mountains. But inside that room, something had changed. The fight ahead was still coming. Caleb Thornton was not finished. The papers were only the beginning. But for the first time, Will Hawthorne was not facing the storm alone. And for the first time, Abby Monroe was not standing beside a man because she needed somewhere to belong. She was standing there because she had found someone worth fighting for. But some battles did not announce themselves with gunfire or shouting. Some arrived quietly. A missing document, an unfamiliar footprint, a door that was not locked the way it had been left. The kind of trouble that entered a home without making a sound. For several days after Abby found the old letters connected to Caleb Thornton, things seemed almost peaceful. Almost. Thomas Reed, the local attorney Martha recommended, had come to Hawthorne Ranch to review the papers. He was a careful man in his late 50s who wore plain suits and carried a leather briefcase that looked older than most of the buildings in Silver Creek. He studied every page, every signature, every date. When he finally closed the folder, he looked at Will. "There is something here." Will leaned forward. "What a pattern!" The word settled heavily in the room. Thomas tapped the papers. "Caleb Thornton knows exactly how to make a land dispute look like a simple mistake. A missing record here. A questionable boundary there." Abby stood near the desk, and then? Thomas looked at her. "Then people get tired. They cannot afford lawyers. They cannot spend months fighting. Until they give up." Thomas nodded. "Exactly." Will looked down at the map spread across his desk, the northern ridge, the creek line, the old trails, land he had spent years protecting. "I won't let him take this." Thomas gathered the papers. "Then we need to be careful." Why? Because men who have built their plans for years rarely walk away when someone finds the truth. Abby looked at Will, and for a moment, she saw something she had seen before, not fear, something quieter. Responsibility, the feeling of a man who believed every problem was his to carry alone. She reached over and placed her hand on the edge of the desk. Not on him, just near him, a small reminder. "You are not alone." Will looked at her, and he understood. That evening, the Hawthorne Ranch felt different. Not because of what was happening outside, because of what was happening inside. For the first time in years, the dining table had more than one conversation around it. Emma was telling Samuel about a mistake she made while trying to bake biscuits. "I forgot the salt." Samuel looked surprised. "You forgot the salt? I was distracted." "By what?" Emma shrugged, thinking. Samuel nodded seriously. "That happens." Abby smiled from the kitchen. The two children understood each other in a way adults often could not. Both had lost pieces of their families. Both had learned to be quiet. And both were slowly discovering what it felt like to be heard. Will stood beside Abby near the stove. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't remember the last time this kitchen sounded like this." She looked toward the table. "Like what?" "Like people belong here." Abby looked at him. "You built a beautiful home, Will." He watched the children. "I built a building." The answer stayed with her because she knew exactly what he meant. A home was something else, something people created together. But the peaceful evening did not last. 3 nights later, the snow returned. Heavy clouds covered the mountains before sunset. The ranch hands finished their work early, bringing the cattle closer and securing the barn doors. The wind pushed against the windows of the main house. Inside, the fire burned low. Will sat at his desk, reviewing documents. Abby was in the kitchen preparing tomorrow's bread. Everything seemed normal until the dogs started barking. Not the usual barking, the sharp kind. The kind that made Will stand immediately. Abby noticed. "What is it?" He listened. For a moment, only the wind answered. Then he reached for his coat. "I'm going to check outside. I'll come with you." "No." The answer came too quickly. Abby looked at him. Will stopped. His expression softened. "I mean, stay here. I know what you mean." A pause. Then she handed him his gloves. "Be careful." He looked at the gloves in his hand. A small thing, but it carried more weight than she probably realized. "I will." When Will returned 20 minutes later, something was wrong. Abby knew before he spoke. "What happened?" He walked straight to the office. The door was open. Her face changed. "Open? I locked it before supper." They entered together. The room looked almost untouched. Almost. But Will immediately saw it. The desk drawers were slightly out of place. The papers had been moved. Thomas's folder was gone. Abby stepped closer. "Are you sure?" Will searched the room carefully. "I'm sure." The silence was broken only by the sound of the wind outside. Then Will noticed something near the window. A small piece of paper. He picked it up. His eyes moved across the words. Abby watched his face. "What does it say?" Will handed it to her. The message was short, simple. "Sell the ranch while you still can." Abby read it twice. Then she looked at Will. "They know about us." He did not answer, but she knew this was not only about land anymore. The next morning, Thomas arrived as soon as he heard. He examined the office carefully. "No broken lock." "No," Will said. "Whoever entered either had a key or knew how to open it." Abby stood near the window. "And they only took the documents?" Thomas nodded. "Nothing else appears missing." That was the part that bothered her, because it meant the person who came inside knew exactly what they wanted. Later that afternoon, Will found Abby outside near the fence. She was watching the mountains. "You should not be here." She looked at him. "Where should I be? Somewhere safer." Her expression changed. There it was, the wall, the same wall he had built around himself. "Will." He looked away. "I can't let you and Emma get caught in this. You don't get to decide that. I do if something happens because of me." The words were quiet, but they carried years behind them. Abby stepped closer. "Because of you," he said nothing. "You really believe everyone who stays near you eventually gets hurt?" His silence answered. Abby's voice softened. "Will." He looked at her. For once, the strongest man in the valley looked like someone who had no idea what to do. "I lost my brother." A pause. "I lost Margaret." His eyes moved toward the ranch house. "I can't lose another family." Abby felt the ache in those words, not because they pushed her away, because they revealed how afraid he was. She reached out and gently took the warning note from his hand. "They are trying to scare us." Will frowned. "What? They want you to think this is your burden." She looked at the paper. "They want me to leave." The realization settled between them. Because she was right. The land was only the weapon. The real target was the bond growing between them. That night, Will sat alone on the porch. The ranch was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that reminded him of years before. Years when the house had been large and empty, when every room held memories, but no voices. Abby found him there after Emma and Samuel had gone to sleep. She carried 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. Neither spoke for a while. The mountains stretched dark against the sky. Finally, Will said, "You should have stayed away." Abby looked at him. "I know. You could lose a lot. I know. You might regret this." She held the cup in both hands. "Maybe." He looked surprised. Then she continued. "But I have spent years losing things, because I was afraid of losing them." The words reached him, slowly, deeply. Abby looked toward the house. I am not leaving because someone decided my place is beside you. She looked back at him. I'm staying because I decided it myself. For a long moment, Will said nothing. Then he lowered his eyes. Not in defeat. In gratitude. Because after all those years of carrying everything alone, someone had finally chosen to carry something with him. But far away, beyond the lights of Hawthorne Ranch, another man watched the road leading into the valley. Caleb Thornton folded his gloves. His plan had failed to frighten Abby away, and that meant he would have to try something else. Caleb Thornton had spent years learning how people broke, not with force, not with threats, with pressure. A farmer who could not pay a debt, a widow who could not afford a lawyer, a rancher who grew tired of fighting a battle that seemed endless. Caleb knew that most people did not lose because they lacked courage. They lost because they ran out of time. But William Hawthorne was not most people, and Abigail Monroe was not the frightened widow Caleb expected. That bothered him more than the missing documents, more than the legal questions, more than the fact that his plan was beginning to unravel. Because Abby had done something Caleb had not expected. She had given Will a reason to fight differently. Before, William Hawthorne protected his land because it was all he had left. Now he protected it because someone else believed it was worth saving. And that made him harder to defeat. The days that followed were filled with papers, meetings, and long hours at the ranch office. Thomas Reed arrived every morning with his leather briefcase. Martha Collins brought coffee and fresh rolls from town. Abby sat beside Will at the desk, sorting through old records while snow melted from the mountain roads outside. The office that once felt like a place of worry slowly became a place of purpose. One afternoon, Thomas spread several documents across the table. There's something we need to understand, he said. Will looked up. What? Caleb's claims are based on old boundary reports. And? Thomas tapped the paper. And those reports were filed by people connected to him. Abby frowned. You mean he created the problem himself? Thomas shook his head. Not exactly, but he has a habit of finding weak points. Will leaned back, meaning he waits until someone is vulnerable. The room went quiet, because everyone understood. Caleb had not chosen Hawthorne Ranch by accident. He had chosen it because Will had spent years building alone, and because a lonely man was easier to pressure. Or at least, that was what Caleb believed. Abby looked at the documents. Then we need someone who saw what happened before. Thomas nodded. That's what I've been searching for. Searching for who? A witness. The answer seemed simple, but in the frontier territories, finding an old witness could be harder than finding an old trail. People moved, families disappeared, records were lost, and memories became harder to trust with every passing year. For the next week, Abby and Thomas followed every small clue. They visited old ranch owners. They checked courthouse records. They spoke with merchants who remembered land purchases from years earlier. Some people helped. Others suddenly became too busy. One man closed his shop door when he saw Thomas approaching. Another claimed he could not remember anything about Caleb Thornton. But Abby noticed something. The people who refused to talk always looked nervous before they refused. They knew something. They were just afraid. One evening, Abby returned to Hawthorne Ranch after visiting an old rancher outside town. Will was waiting near the barn. You look tired. She smiled slightly. You sound like me. I learned from you. That might be dangerous. A small smile appeared on his face. Then he looked at the road behind her. Did you find anything? She shook her head. Not yet. Will lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. For what? For putting you through this. Abby studied him. You still think this is your storm? He said nothing. She stepped closer. Will, I chose to walk into it. The wind moved through the trees. For a moment, he just looked at her. Then he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "What's that?" "The warning note." "Why do you still have it?" "Because I wanted to remember something." Abby waited. Will unfolded the paper. "He thought this would make you leave." He looked at the words, but it did the opposite. Abby smiled softly. Then perhaps Caleb made his first mistake. What mistake? He underestimated what people are willing to protect. That night, Thomas Reed returned with news. He arrived after sunset, carrying his briefcase and a look Abby immediately understood. Not victory, but progress. "I found someone." Everyone gathered in the office. Will stood. "Who?" "Samuel Carter." The name meant nothing to Abby, but Thomas continued. "Years ago, Carter worked as a survey assistant. He helped record property boundaries throughout the territory." "Where is he now?" "Living near the western foothills." Will looked at the papers. "And he knows about Caleb?" Thomas nodded. "He remembers several disputes." Abby felt a small spark of hope, but Thomas sighed. "He's old. His health is not good, and he does not like getting involved anymore." Will looked toward the window. "How far?" 2 days by wagon," Abby immediately spoke. "We go tomorrow." Will looked at her. "You don't have to." She gave him a familiar look, the one that told him he already knew the answer. "Don't start." For a moment, he almost smiled. Then he nodded. "All right." The journey took them through mountain roads covered with early spring mud. The snow was finally disappearing, leaving behind streams of water running beside the trail. Emma stayed with Martha in town, while Abby, Will, and Thomas traveled west. For hours, they rode with only the sound of wagon wheels and horses moving beneath them. At sunset on the second day, they reached a small cabin near the foothills. An elderly man opened the door. Samuel Carter. He looked at Thomas first, then Will, then Abby. "I wondered when someone would finally come asking about those papers." Will stepped forward. "You knew?" The old man leaned against the doorframe. "I knew Caleb Thornton was trouble before most people learned his name." Thomas exchanged a glance with Will. "Why didn't you say anything?" Samuel looked towards the mountains, because people don't always want the truth when the truth makes their lives harder. Abby understood that. She had seen it herself. Truth was not always welcomed. Sometimes it was inconvenient. Sometimes it asked people to stand when they preferred to sit quietly. The old man invited them inside. The cabin was small, a wooden table, a worn chair, a shelf of old books. He opened a box beneath the table and removed several papers wrapped in cloth. "These are copies." Thomas leaned forward. "Copies of what?" "Original survey notes." Samuel placed them down carefully. Caleb changed the story by changing the records people saw. Will looked at the documents. His eyes moved slowly across the pages. Then he stopped. "What is this?" Samuel pointed. "The original boundary line." Thomas examined the paper. His expression changed. "This proves the claim against Hawthorne Ranch is false." The cabin became silent. Not because the fight was over, but because for the first time, they could see the path ahead. A way through. Samuel Carter looked at Abby. "You're the woman he chose?" The question surprised her. She glanced at Will, then back at the old man. Yes. Samuel nodded slowly. "Good." Abby smiled faintly. "Why?" The old man looked toward Will. "Because that man has spent half his life building things." A pause. Someone needed to remind him why. On the ride home, the mountains seemed different. The same peaks, the same roads. But something had shifted. They had the evidence. They had the truth. Yet Abby knew the hardest part was still coming. Caleb Thornton would not surrender quietly, and when he learned they had found the missing piece of the puzzle, he would know exactly who had helped uncover it. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Will stopped the wagon. He looked at Abby. "I owe you an apology." She looked surprised. "For what?" "For believing I had to protect you by keeping you away." Abby was quiet. Then she said, "I forgive you." Will smiled slightly. That easy? No. She looked ahead. But I know what it feels like to be afraid of losing something. The two of them sat in silence. Not the lonely silence of the past, a different kind, the kind shared by people who had survived something together. But miles away, Caleb Thornton received the news. The papers had been found, the witness had spoken, and Abby Monroe was the reason. He folded the message slowly. The game had changed. For weeks, Caleb Thornton had believed he understood everyone involved. He understood William Hawthorne, a powerful rancher who carried old wounds and protected his land like it was the last piece of himself left. He understood the townspeople, people who whispered first and asked questions later, and he thought he understood Abigail Monroe, a widow running a small boarding house, a woman who had spent years surviving quietly, a woman he assumed would step away when the pressure became too heavy. But he had been wrong about the one person who mattered most. Abby did not run, and that was the one thing Caleb Thornton had not prepared for. By the time Abby, Will, and Thomas returned to Silver Creek Valley, the entire town seemed to know something had happened. News traveled quickly in frontier communities, a rider arriving late at night, a conversation outside the general store, a few words exchanged near the blacksmith. By morning, people already knew that the old survey records had been found, but knowing there was evidence and proving it were two different things. The final hearing was scheduled for the following week. Until then, every day felt like a held breath. At Hawthorne Ranch, life continued. That was the strange part. Even with the uncertainty hanging over them, the ordinary moments became more important. Emma helped Samuel feed the chickens. Samuel showed her how to repair a loose strap on a saddle. Abby baked bread in the kitchen while Will worked outside. The ranch no longer felt like a place waiting for something to happen. It felt alive. One morning, Will walked into the kitchen carrying a small wooden box. Abby looked up from the dough she was preparing. "What's that?" He placed it on the table. "I found it while cleaning the office." She wiped flour from her hands and opened it. Inside were old letters, a few photographs, and a small silver hair clip. Abby looked at him. "Margaret?" He nodded. She kept everything. Abby carefully picked up one of the letters. "I'm sorry." Will sat across from her. "For a long time, I thought keeping these things meant I was holding on to the past." He looked toward the window. "But lately, I've been thinking maybe remembering someone doesn't mean you can't make room for something new." Abby lowered her eyes. She understood, because she had done the same thing with Daniel. For years, she thought moving forward meant leaving something behind. But maybe that was not true. Maybe love was not a door that closed. Maybe it was a room that grew. That evening, they ate dinner together. Not a grand meal, just stew, bread, and coffee. But when Abby looked around the table, she noticed something. There were no empty chairs. Samuel was telling a story about a horse that refused to leave the barn. Emma was laughing. Will was smiling, a real smile, the kind Abby rarely saw. And for a moment, she forgot about Caleb. She forgot about the hearing. She forgot about everything waiting outside those walls. Then the next morning, Thomas arrived with news. Not bad news, but not the easy answer either. Caleb's lawyer filed a final challenge. Will looked up. "What kind? They claim the documents were found too recently to verify." Abby frowned. "So they're saying the evidence is real, but questioning how it was discovered." Thomas nodded. "Exactly." I stepped toward the window. "He's trying to delay." "Yes, how long?" Thomas sighed. "Long enough for people to become tired." Abby looked at Will. The same old strategy. Pressure, waiting, hoping people gave up. But this time no one was standing alone. The day of the hearing arrived with gray skies and cold wind. The courthouse in Silver Creek was small, a simple wooden building with a narrow hallway and a few benches inside. People gathered outside, Some came because they supported Will. Others came because they wanted to see what would happen. Caleb arrived wearing a clean black coat. He looked calm, confident, like a man who still believed he had control. When he saw Abby beside Will, his expression changed only slightly, but she noticed he had expected her to disappear. She did not. Inside, Thomas presented the documents. The original survey notes, the witness statement, the history of similar disputes involving Caleb's business dealings. Piece by piece, the story became clear. Not through accusations, through facts, through records, through years of details that Caleb had hoped no one would connect. When Samuel Carter's testimony was read, the room became quiet. The old survey assistant's words carried the weight of someone who had waited a long time to tell the truth. Caleb's lawyer tried to challenge the evidence, but each question only revealed more. By the end of the afternoon, the decision was made. The claim against Hawthorne Ranch was dismissed. The land remained with William Hawthorne. Outside the courthouse, no one celebrated loudly. Frontier victories were rarely dramatic. Sometimes they came as a simple breath after a long struggle. Will stood on the steps. The mountains stretched behind the town. Abby walked beside him. "It's over." He nodded. Yes, but he did not look happy, only tired. She noticed. "What is it?" Will looked down. "For years, I thought saving this ranch was the thing that mattered most. And now," he looked toward the road leading back to Hawthorne Ranch. "Now I think I was wrong." Abby waited. He continued. "I spent so much time protecting the walls." A pause. "I forgot to ask who I wanted inside them." Her eyes softened. "Will." He looked at her. "I don't want you here because the ranch needs someone." She stayed quiet. "I don't want Emma and Samuel here because this house feels empty." He took a breath. "I want you here because when you walk through that door, it feels like the place finally makes sense." For once, Abby had no quick answer, no practical response, no reason to hide behind. Just a quiet moment between two people who had both spent years being strong. Then she reached for his hand. A small gesture, but enough. The weeks after the hearing passed peacefully, Caleb Thornton left Silver Creek Valley. The whispers faded. The town that once questioned Abby slowly began to see what Will had seen from the beginning. Not a woman who needed saving, a woman who brought something valuable with her. Life, warmth, a reason for people to gather. One evening, Abby stood outside the ranch house watching Emma and Samuel race across the yard. Will joined her. "They're loud," he said. She smiled. "Yes, used to bother me. And now?" He watched them. "Now I notice when it's quiet." Abby looked at him. That answer told her everything. Later that night, they sat beside the fireplace. The house was peaceful, not empty. Peaceful. Will looked around the room, then back at her. "If I build the walls," Abby smiled because she already knew the question. He continued anyway, "Will you help me fill the rooms?" For a moment she said nothing. Then she looked toward the kitchen, toward the table, toward the hallway where two children's voices could still be heard. And finally, she looked back at him. Yes, a simple word, but it carried years of fear, years of loss, years of wondering if happiness was something people like them were allowed to have. Outside, the wind moved through the mountains. Inside, the fire kept burning. And for the first time in a very long time, William Hawthorne's house did not feel like a place where memories lived. It felt like a place where a future was beginning. The change did not happen all at once. Homes rarely changed that way. There was no single morning when the empty rooms suddenly became full. No single day when the silence disappeared forever. It happened slowly. A chair moved closer to the kitchen table. A second set of boots appeared beside the door. A child's drawing found its way onto the wall near the fireplace. A jar of wildflowers sat on the windowsill where there had once only been dust. Small things, simple things. But William Hawthorne noticed every one. For years, he had walked through his ranch house knowing exactly where everything belonged: the furniture, the tools, the books, the memories. Then Abby Monroe arrived, and suddenly the house had things he could not measure. Warm bread cooling on the counter. The sound of Emma laughing upstairs, Samuel asking questions instead of sitting quietly. The smell of coffee in the morning before sunrise, the sound of someone humming while she worked. Things no builder could create, things no amount of money could buy. Spring came early to Silver Creek Valley that year. The snow pulled back from the mountains, revealing patches of green grass beneath the white. The creek near the ranch began moving again, carrying melted snow toward the lower fields. The cattle returned to the open pastures, and Hawthorne Ranch became a place people visited for reasons other than business. Neighbors stopped by for supper. Ranch hands stayed longer after finishing their work. Children ran through the yard without anyone telling them to be quiet. One afternoon, Abby stood outside hanging laundry while Emma and Samuel chased each other near the fence. Will walked up carrying a bundle of freshly cut wood. "You know," he said, "I used to think a quiet house meant a peaceful one." Abby looked over, and now he glanced toward the children. "I think I confused silence with peace." She smiled. "That happens to people." "We'll set the wood down. You knew that already, didn't you?" Abby looked at the house. "My old boarding house was never big. No, but it was never empty." Will nodded. He understood. That was the lesson both of them had learned. A house was not measured by how many rooms it had. It was measured by whether someone wanted to come back through the door. That summer, preparations began for the wedding. Not a grand event. Not the kind Eleanor Whitman and the wealthy families of the territory might have expected. Abby wanted something simple, something honest. A small gathering overlooking the mountains, friends, neighbors, family, the people who had stood beside them. Martha Collins insisted on making the arrangements. "You two would forget your own wedding if nobody reminded you." Abby laughed. "That is not true." Martha raised an eyebrow. "You forgot to eat lunch 3 times last week. That was different." "How? I was busy. With what?" Abby thought about it, then smiled. "Living." Martha softened, because she knew what that word meant. For years, Abby had only survived. Now she was living. The morning of the wedding arrived clear and bright. The mountains stood beneath a wide blue sky. The wooden platform near the overlook was decorated with simple flowers gathered from the valley. No unnecessary decorations. No attempt to impress anyone. Just beauty where it naturally existed. Emma stood beside Abby, holding her hand. "You look happy." Abby looked down at her daughter. "I am," Emma smiled. "I knew you would be." Abby brushed a strand of hair away from Emma's face. "You did?" "Yes." "How?" The girl shrugged. "Because you stopped looking at the door." Abby paused. "What?" "Before Mr. Hawthorne came, you always looked at the door." Emma looked toward Will, who stood waiting near the mountains, like you were expecting someone to leave. The words were simple, but they carried years of truth. Abby looked at Will, the man who had arrived during a winter storm carrying lumber. The man who had offered help without making her feel weak. The man who had built fences and repaired walls. But more importantly, the man who had shown her that staying was a choice. When Abby walked toward him, she did not walk because she needed someone to protect her. She did not walk because she needed a bigger house. She did not walk because the world had finally decided she was worthy. She walked because she had found someone who saw her before anyone else did. Will took her hand. His fingers tightened gently. A small gesture, a quiet promise. The ceremony was simple, the kind of ceremony people remembered not because of what was said, but because of how it felt. Afterward, everyone gathered near the ranch house. Tables were covered with food. Coffee was poured. Children ran between chairs. Laughter carried across the yard. Samuel stood beside Abby for a moment. He looked uncomfortable, like he was trying to find the right words. "What is it?" she asked. He looked down. "I wanted to say something." "All right," a pause. Then he spoke quietly. "I used to think families were only people you were born with." Abby's expression softened. Samuel continued, "But I think I was wrong." He looked toward Will, then Emma, then back at Abby. "Thank you for staying." Abby knelt slightly so they were closer. "Samuel." The boy looked away, embarrassed, but she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to thank someone for loving you." For a moment, he said nothing, then he nodded. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Abby and Will stood outside the ranch house. The sky was darkening over the mountains, the same mountains that had watched them through every difficult moment. Will looked toward the windows. Lights glowed inside. A sound came from the kitchen. Emma and Samuel were still talking, still laughing. He smiled. "I spent years thinking I needed someone to help me save this ranch." Abby looked at him. He continued, "But I was wrong." He looked at the house. "I needed someone to teach me what it was for." Abby leaned against him. "And what is it for?" Will looked through the window again, for a long moment. He did not answer. Then he said, "For coming home." The wind moved softly through the valley. The ranch stood strong. The walls were still made of wood. The floors were still made of stone. The roof still needed repairs sometimes. The work never ended. But that was all right, because Abby finally understood something. A perfect life was never the promise. A real life was. One with difficult days, one with old wounds, one with moments of fear and uncertainty, but also one with people who chose to stay. Years later, people in Silver Creek Valley would still tell the story of William Hawthorne, the giant cowboy of the mountains, and Abby Monroe, the woman who helped turn his lonely ranch into a home. Some remembered the land dispute. Some remembered the storm. Some remembered the day the richest rancher in the valley married a woman many people had overlooked. But those who knew them best remembered something simpler. They remembered that an empty house became full, not because someone arrived to fix it, but because two people finally found a place where they both belonged. A house is made of wood and stone, but a home is made by the people who choose to stay. And maybe that is the part of Abby and Will's story that stays with us the longest. Not the ranch, not the mountains, not even the struggles they faced. It was the quiet choice two wounded people made when they decided to trust again. Imagine standing where Abby stood, after losing someone you loved, after learning how to carry every burden alone. Imagine being afraid to open the door because you have already watched someone walk away before. Then imagine meeting someone who does not promise a perfect life, but simply promises to stand beside you through the imperfect one. Because sometimes healing does not arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes through a steady hand, a warm meal waiting at the table, a person who keeps showing up when leaving would be easier. Abby and Will's journey reminds us that love is not about finding someone who saves us. It is about finding someone who chooses us and allowing ourselves to choose them back. If this story touched your heart, we would love to hear from you. What part of Abby and Will's journey meant the most to you? And if you enjoy stories of love, hope, mystery, and second chances, consider subscribing. There are many more heartfelt stories waiting for you in the chapters ahead.